Hey, and welcome back to the Journey Podcast, and thanks for taking just a little bit of extra time out of your week this week to join us as we continue to learn together how hearing other stories helps us to live a better story ourselves. If you and your children go to church, only about an hour of your child's week is hearing about God in that building. So what do we do the rest of the week to continue to point them to Christ? How do we make sure to keep the conversation going to help them develop into passionate followers of Christ? Today on the podcast, we have Caitie Betts. She's going to talk to us a bit about how to take Christ into our homes and outside the walls of the church while we direct children towards Christ. Hey, and welcome back to the Journey Podcast. My name is Eli, and today I have the great fortune to be joined by possibly the nicest staff member at Crosspoint Community Church, and those of you who go here can probably already guess who that is. Caitie, thank you so much for being here with me today.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Yeah, well, for those of us who don't know, not us, because obviously I know you. I work with you every day. I hope so. But for anyone who may not know you, just tell us a little bit about yourself, maybe how long you've been here, and just a tiny bit about yourself.
Sure. So my name's Caitie Betts. I've been at Crosspoint for a little over 4 years now. I work with kids ages birth through 5th grade. I recently got married to my husband, Jimmy. We have 2 pet rabbits. And one thing we love to do is travel together.
Yeah, that's awesome. Where was the last place you guys went?
This past weekend we went to Red River Gorge. Neither one of us had ever been, and we went kayaking underground, so it was really cool.
Yeah, he said that was really cool. He also said it rained pretty much the whole time, but you guys had a good spot under a tree.
Rain is one word for it. It thunderstormed the whole time we were there. I thought we were gonna get struck by lightning.
Yeah. Well, he said you weren't just under a tree. You had a tent as well.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, that's awesome. You have a good time?
Yeah, it was cool. I'm trying to get to know Kentucky more, so
yeah,
it's cool to see more of it.
Well, I've heard the kayaking under the underground kayaking, I guess is what they call it, is awesome. I mean, I've heard it's a really cool experience, pretty different kind of vibe.
Definitely recommend you try it out.
Yeah. Well, we'll just jump right into it. You know, today I wanted to have you on because part of the twofold concept that we have on this podcast is we like hearing stories that help us live a better story ourselves, but also we really think it's important to find different areas that we can be discipled in, right?
Yeah.
And that includes me, that includes anybody who's listening to this, even our pastor Chad, if he's listening to this. This is all areas that we hope each of us can learn from and improve in. And me, having pretty much my primary and almost exclusive area of focus being music, I know almost next to nothing about children. I am, babies like me sometimes because they like pulling my beard. That's about all I've got. And so I just wanted to talk to you a little bit about how we can sow into children's lives outside of just the walls of the church and outside of just the Sunday morning, which obviously is hugely important. And I never hear anything but great stuff about how awesome you guys do back there. But so jumping into it, what do you think is probably the most, well, I guess number one, what is the most important takeaway you feel like children should have when they come to church on Sunday morning, just starting in that space? Like, what is something that you feel like if they come here and leave with one thing, this is the one thing I would love for them to leave with?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think working in a church, it's really easy to focus on, did they learn the Bible story we're trying to come across, or the message that Chad is preaching? Are the kids understanding the child version of that story? Mm-hmm. But my biggest approach to kids ministry is, did they feel seen, known, and loved?
For sure, yeah.
Did somebody ask them their name? Mm-hmm. If they were hungry, simple as it is, did somebody go get them a snack?
Yeah.
Or maybe they came in having a really hard morning. They didn't sleep a lot last night. Did they have their needs met, and were they seen for who they are? Mm-hmm. So I try to tell our volunteer team, even if they're not doing the craft that goes along with the Bible story that we had planned, as long as they know that they can come here and people know who they are and they feel loved, to me, that's a win.
Yeah. Well, isn't it funny too? Because even us as adults, like, feeling seen is so important.
Yeah.
Right. And it's a lot of times that feels like behavior that we learn as a kid, you know? And so that's awesome that you provide that environment. And I think it's really cool because every time, well, both leading up to the podcast today and every time we've talked about it, you're very passionate about the subject. And it's so funny as, watching you like get excited. You saw you preparing something for Best Sunday Ever in the lobby the other day, and it's just funny watching you be excited about it. And it's awesome. But how did you become so passionate about children and children's ministry?
Sure. So I grew up going to church, and so every Sunday, almost 2 weekdays a week, I was at church. And in some ways that was good. In some ways I kind of got tired of it at times because I mean, there's only so many stories you go through, you know? Yeah. But that was my life every week. So it's something that I've known from a young age. And I've seen the impact of kids ministry in my life, as well as my families with my sister, my cousins, my niece and nephew. It's something that I want to be a part of now.
Yeah. That's awesome. That's awesome. Well, in that passion, as you have seen it evidenced time and time again, how did you see that manifest in your life early on? Like what was a way that you felt maybe seen as a kid, or maybe what is one way that you remember as a child kind of turning your life in a way that you started understanding God, or you started seeing God more, or you felt like, maybe you were given the opportunity to experience more of God as a child?
So one thing that I don't know if people realize is one thing that's different between church for children and church for adults is for kids, it's very much focused on learning about God. And kind of like at school, you're there to learn. But I think as adults and as teens, we truly learn to know God. And have a relationship with Him. So growing up, I spent multiple days of the week at church, and it was great. I could answer questions about any story, you know what I mean? I knew about God, but it wasn't until an adult had a conversation with me outside of church on Sunday mornings, just about my normal life, that I really got to experience Him and His love for me and begin a relationship with Him.
Yeah, for sure.
And so I think that goes a long way, and that's why I'm really passionate about teaching people how to have conversations with children or teens about God, is because when we're able to do that outside of those teaching moments and when they're in the classroom, that's when kids are able to make their faith their own.
For sure. Yeah, and something that you've said before that I've heard you say, it's like kind of when we get to talk as a child about our doubts and our fears, and like that's where a lot of our real faith resides, because as we learn the stories about God, that helps inform us of our relationship with God and how to approach God. I
think as an adult, I can hear a message, like when Chad preaches, I can hear a message in a story and hear the lesson in that and apply it to my life. Whereas with kids, we need to model that for them to realize this is not just a story that I'm reading or a movie that I'm watching. This has applications for my life too. God was with, God was with Daniel when he felt alone. That means He's going to be with me when my parents are going through a divorce or when my fish died. You know what I mean?
Yeah, for sure.
Like, I think when we model those applications, I think that's when kids start to make that switch of God loves me, not just the person in that story.
And then it also makes you, as you model stuff with consistency, it makes you a trusted person in their life that much further as well. And so as we start having these conversations with children, I think what we do, and I think part of it's the nature of being an adult and you live this life and you experience all this stuff, but we tend to overcomplicate things a good bit. And so what is there in that space that we can think about as we do tend to overcomplicate things, how can we approach that maybe with some more simplicity as we kind of talk to our kids or our family members, or even just a child who may trust us?
Sure. Yeah, that's a great question. I'm going to preface this by saying I don't have kids of my own, and so these are experiences I've learned in a professional setting, working with children. But I think the stronger relationship a child has with an adult, the more they're going to value those conversations. So I might see a child for 1 hour a week, and they might know me and trust me, but a conversation about God with me is not even nearly as strong as it would be with a parent.
For sure.
Because they have a much stronger and closer relationship with them. And so I think a lot of people overcomplicate conversations about God because they think, oh, I'll just send my kid to church and learn about that. But again, my relationship with their kid is going to be very surface level compared to the parent or the grandparent or whoever takes care of, even an older sibling. And so I think having conversations about God doesn't need to be, oh, I need to go buy this devotional for kids, or I need to send them to this church. It's simply inviting God into our everyday lives and having conversations about those. I can think of, I think a really big topic recently, or just in general with kids, is bullying. Like if a kid's being bullied at school, for example, if, I don't know, they might snort while they laugh. That can be a time for the parent or the family member to not only comfort their child, but an opportunity to say, well, you know what? God made us all different. So they might be laughing at you because they don't laugh that way. But that's actually one of, like, your laugh is one of God's favorite things that makes you you. And again, that's not pulling out a devotional book. That's not bringing them to talk to Chad or a pastor. It's simply inviting God into those real moments that the kids are already experiencing.
And it's cool too, because it's so funny. We talk about, kids who are like, oh, they're just such a sweet kid. They're always so encouraging to people around them. Well, so much of what, we talk about it, I think we've talked about it, you and I have talked about it a couple times, but even on the podcast, we've talked about how much learned behavior from when you're a child you take in. Like, even just having a parent or sibling or a trusted adult speak life into that and say, well, no, like, they may laugh, but the reality is that God loves that about you, or whatever. It's pretty soon that turns into that child encouraging other children who may be being bullied, or other children who may be going through something that's difficult. So that's a good train of thought to go down, though, is the conversations that happen in the flow of normal life. I think, and it all lines up with kind of the overcomplication of things, and because there is a pressure that I'm sure parents feel. Again, I don't have kids, but as someone who follows Christ, I'm sure that there's a measure of unknown where it's like, well, at the end of the day, whenever they become an adult or a teenager or whatever, like, they have to make that choice. And so the best thing we can do is to lay the groundwork as best can be done. In the same way that, for us doing a Sunday morning service, and there may be an adult that shows up who doesn't follow Christ, we can't force them to make that decision. The best thing we can do is to present the gospel and to present the heart of Christ in a manner that is accessible and tangible to them. And so maybe what's another example of, like, how a faith conversation can happen within the confines of everyday life, no special circumstance required?
I mean, that can be as simple as, I don't know, if your family's walking through the park, or let's say during the summer you take a day to go to the zoo. It could be as simple as saying, wow, like, look how beautiful God's creation is. And that simply opens the door to conversation about, God made like he may not have made the swings and the slide, but he made the trees and the sky, and
but he made the people who made the swings
right,
and
exactly.
slides,
Yeah, sorry.
Yeah.
Like I think little moments like that really open the door to being able to not only have conversations, but open the door to questions. Like you may say, "Wow, this God's creation is so beautiful. Isn't it amazing how He created all, like the river and the sky?" And then it could open questions to, well, those are all really big. Like, how big is God? You know, like
yeah, for sure.
Questions that parents and I wouldn't have an answer to, but it opens the door to conversation about faith, which is ultimately how faith grows.
Yeah, for sure. Well, and two, I think talking about faith growing, I know something that we run into as adults a lot of time is how do we interact with God in the midst of something that's hard?
Yeah.
And it's something that I don't remember where I heard it, but it's interesting. As a child, it's very easy to have the worst day of your life because you haven't lived much. Right. And so maybe a pet dying is actually the worst day of your life as a child.
Yeah.
So what is a good way to confront that, maybe as another talking opportunity when something really hard stands in their face and it's like, okay, I don't maybe have a full answer to this.
Yeah. No, I think that's a really good point, because I think on those really hard days, parents feel expected to have an answer. They might feel expected to want to fix everything, and oftentimes we can't. Like, for example, like you said, if a kid's dog dies, I think it is more than okay to simply say, I don't know why bad things happen.
Yeah.
Or for example, like when I was little, my family moved a lot. And I've had conversations with kids recently where they've had to start all over. They have to move houses, move schools, try to make friends again. And I think it is more than okay to admit that you don't know why God lets these things happen. But you can say, I do know that we can talk to God on the hard days and that He's going to be with us and comfort us no matter what we're going through.
Sure.
And again, maybe it's the fish. Like, maybe the fish dies. You had it for 2 days.
Yeah.
But it's a big deal to them.
Well, it doesn't have to make sense to us why it's a big deal.
Yes.
That's the important thing, is it doesn't, like, I feel like as adults we can get so caught up in like, what are we doing here? Like, why is this a thing? Well, it doesn't really matter. What matters and what's going to be remembered. And this is children, adults, anybody, but specifically with children, what matters and what's going to be remembered is how the interaction goes.
Yes. How you respond.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Precisely.
Yeah. And again, maybe it's they lost their favorite toy. Easily you could go buy a new one.
For sure.
But that's not the same one. So to them, that was their favorite toy. It's gone. Now I lost my train of thought.
I'm sorry.
No, you're fine. No, they lost their favorite toy. It is in how you respond and simply saying, like, this isn't a big deal to you. But if you show that you care and show that God cares about what they're going through, down the road when they're 16 and going through a breakup, or when they're older and maybe they get caught up in the wrong crowd of friends and bad things happen that are more serious in our minds as adults. Those little moments of, well, God was with me when my fish died. Maybe He's with me now too. Like when I'm heartbroken or when I feel alone. It sounds silly saying it out loud, but I think those little moments, they really do add up down the road.
Oh, and I don't think it's silly at all. I mean, obviously the goldfish, comparison is hard again as adults to wrap your mind around, but I think anybody who's listening here, and you and I both, anybody on staff here, like, we've all gone through stuff that has made us doubt.
Yeah.
And made us question and made us feel alone and these are all experiences that children feel. These are all big emotions for little people. Sure. You know what I mean? And so, yeah, I don't think it's crazy to say, or I don't even think it's silly to say, like, yeah, the more we model the heart of Christ with consistency, which is patience, patient whenever you don't actually think it's a very big deal, but hearing them and letting them have that space to speak.
Yeah.
And, and then modeling it with grace. And like you said, the more that they can see that and hear modeled for them, okay, God cares about this small thing, or God cared about this thing that felt huge when I was a kid. And even if it leads them to a place of, well, what the heck, I'm just going to try. I'm going to try and pray. Who knows? I don't know if it's going to do anything or not. But that's the kind of sort of just thought that's planted in their head from a very, very early age.
Yes.
That, like you said, we hope carries on and is something that pops up in their head again, maybe unexpectedly when bigger stuff happens.
Yeah. Also, going off of that, I try to tell people that I think it's really important for kids to see and know that their parents struggle. Mm-hmm. And I know that probably sounds bad because parents want to be there for their kids and show them that they have it all together and that they can always provide for their kid. But I think in little moments like this, like when I was little and we moved, some of my best conversations with my parents were when they said, "Oh, honey, my day was awful too. Like, I had to start a new job.
Yeah.
I didn't know anyone. I embarrassed myself in front of all these new people, just like maybe the kid would at school."
Yeah.
And knowing that, as bad as it sounds, knowing that my mom struggled in the same way that I did, it opens the door for us to be like, well, now we can work through it together. Let's both ask God to be with us on day 2 when we don't want to go back, but we have to, Yeah. Or if a kid is struggling or doubting, for a parent to be like, oh, I've had a lot of questions I've had to ask God too, because it's very rare that our faith is all together and makes sense to us, I guess.
Yeah.
But when we're able to admit that we struggle to other people, that's really, as adults, I mean, that's how small groups work. That's how accountability works with other people. And I think kids need to see that too in some ways.
Well, and too, I think even, I even think about myself now and talking to my mom and dad and, like if I have like the slightest question, it's so funny. I've been, me, anybody who works with me on staff knows that I'm notorious for having car troubles. Something is always wrong with one of my cars, or I get in a car accident or something random happens. But this past a week and a half ago, the air conditioner went out in my car. Oh, no. And which is the worst time. Last week was unbelievably hot. But like the first thing I did was I immediately called my dad because I thought he's going to have an answer for me, and it's the same thing as a kid. And so I think it's important, at least from my perspective, it's like you said, it's okay for them to see like, okay, I don't have the answers, but I'm going to continue.
Yes.
Continuing is important.
Yeah.
So wrapping up here, what is kind of, whether you're the parent of a child or whether you just have the opportunity to speak into a child's life, we can't ignore opportunities to disciple children.
True.
That's part of what we are. Children are people too. That they're not outside of the Great Commission of Christ, where we're supposed to take His gospel into the entire earth. Like, they're part of that. And so, in discipling children, what is a good mindset to have as we're doing this? Like, maybe what is like a way that we can think about it as our approach?
Yeah. Well, I think just like with a lot of things with kids, I know a couple families that are potty training. The first time, you're not going to see results right away.
Yeah.
Same thing with having faith conversations, or even bringing your child to church. Like, you're not immediately going to see drastic change in their behavior or their trust. But knowing that every time you reach out, or every intentional moment with your child is planting a seed, I think that is what helps me on days when I'm not really seeing results.
Yeah.
Knowing that, okay, this is a seed, and even if the kid still left feeling upset, they knew that God is going to be with them. They knew that they can talk to him. And later down the road, like I said, when they're a teenager, when they're an adult, those little seeds add up, and they look back and they think, oh yeah, you know, when I was little, this random lady that I don't even remember her name, she told me that God was going to be with me even on my hardest days. Yeah. And so I think remembering that those are little seeds that you're planting, eventually those are going to grow.
Yeah, yeah. And just continuing to take the opportunity.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
Like, the opportunities will present themselves as you kind of outlined for us earlier. Like, the opportunities are there.
Yeah.
It's up to us to see them. It's up to us to look at that and say, okay, you know, here is something that might be mundane, or I feel like is not a huge thing, but where is Christ in this thing?
Right.
You know?
Yeah.
And yeah,
inviting him into those everyday moments is, to me, the biggest thing you can do.
Yeah. Number one, that's our goal. Same thing as everything else. It is all about having relationship. Yeah. And it is all about whether the person is 3 years old or the person is 103 years old or less than 3, whatever. You know, it is all about creating relationship and creating meaningful space for God to be within those relationships.
Sure. Definitely.
So, well, Caitie, thank you so much for being here today and you know, kind of talking through a subject that, you know, I feel like is really important for us to hear about, whether you have a child or don't. And so I appreciate you coming in.
Yeah, and if anybody has any questions, I'm happy to try and answer their questions.
For sure. Well, yeah, once again, thank you so much. And to anybody who is joining us, thank you for sticking around with us today. And if you don't go to Crosspoint, we're so glad you happened to randomly find us, and we hope you'll come back. And if you haven't heard the podcast before, we encourage you to go back and listen. We've gotten to do a handful of these now, and we've talked to a lot of really, really good people who have told us some pretty fascinating stories about their life. And so, once more, thank you so much for being here on the Journey Podcast, where we believe that hearing other people's stories helps us to live a better story ourselves. We hope to catch you next time.